I know Director Popoff, you had put your hand up before we took a break. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm looking at that local conservation fund. ARH joined back in 2022, but the 10-year review is starting in 2014 when the other ones were. So ARH does not have a separate bylaw. We're part of that bylaw. Now, I probably defer to staff to explain why this motion's on the table to remove that 10-year review, where the Local Government Act basically states that parcel tax has a start and an end. But I can possibly explain it because I did a little bit of investigation, but I would defer to Tom Jul to explain the process on it. The second issue I have is putting a bylaw like that on the table without directors having a review of that bylaw. Short time period is, when we had a few days to review it, is if we do first and second reading on that bylaw for an opportunity for directors to provide comments and get comments from their constituents on that and then bring it back at the next board table. So that's the motion that I'll be making on this bylaw, but I defer to Tom Jul to explain to us why it's being removed.
Okay, well, I do want to note we don't need to repeat what's in the report. We've all read the report, so we understand the process. I think, yes, first and second would mean we don't need to move on it now, but we can get in the queue and then have that discussion. What I would like identified is that at our last, we don't have a formal committee for this service, and now that we've developed even more being added to it, essentially it should have gone through a service committee and then made recommendations from that point, because we do have members joining at different times where that 10-year trigger is not aligned with that. So there's a big discussion on that. Tom, is there anything around the process that is not in the report that you would like to highlight or identify here?
Respectfully to the chair, I captured it all in the report. I'd just like to note again that as a regional district, there are fundamentally different requirements for regional districts than there are for municipalities. There's no kind of time constraint placed on a regional district in terms of the implementation of a parcel tax fund.
Thank you, and I know you go ahead because I think we'll probably say the same thing. Go ahead, Director Jackman.
Okay, thank you. I think Director Popoff is on the right track for a couple of reasons. One is I sat in on everyone I could of the public sessions where the promotion of this service at the outset, the advertising for it, was left in the hands of the Kootenai Conservation Program. And in each session I was at, they highlighted, if you vote this in, don't worry, it's not forever. It's going to be reviewed in 10 years. And that, to me, was the promise to the electorate that they would have a say 10 years later. Now, I appreciate, Tom Jul has pointed out we have the power to do away with that kind of thing, but this is the worst kind of thing to do, especially in what we've seen in recent years with concerns about budget and trust issues and the like, that all of a sudden three readings and adoption and something gone. So Director Popoff has suggested to go first and second reading. That's fine. That's about the only way to get the public's attention. This is something that could be done. It could be done next month or really soon. And then we really need to go back out. I mean, KCP, Kootenai Conservation Program, does have a lot of information. We should be able to glean from that of what we've done so far, but put it out from us, from local government, saying, here's what we've done, here's what we've taxed you for, here's the multiplier of the money we've leveraged. And that, like it or not, we can just continue doing that, but we'd like some feedback. And apparently this new feedback portal, I can never remember the name, Stuart will remember the name.
Hang the table.
You're right, just actually put my hand down. So I do know what it is. That is a minimum, I think, to tell people we're on the verge of changing what we told you 10 years ago, and we at least want to listen to you. You may not act on what you say. But I really don't think we should adopt something like this right away. Understanding we could, we should just be cautious.
Okay, Tom, go ahead, but just one second. Director Fike, I see you are with us and you have video. How's your audio? I got your email. Yeah, no, it's still not working. I can't hear you, but I can see you speaking. Okay, we'll use chat for now. And we'll do what we can. And I do also understand you might have to leave as well. So I'll just watch for that. And thanks for trying to join.
Okay.
Thank
and
you.
I should clarify, it's I wanted to know if third reading is preferable to second reading for any reason, I guess. I should have added that. Director Pop-Up said first and second reading is 3 readings better, or should we end it to if we only do partial?
Okay, sorry, Tom, go ahead.
Respectfully to the chair, the board may choose to remove the requirement for a 10-year. The board may choose to leave that requirement for a 10-year, or the board may choose to change the scope altogether of that time or how the review could happen. Those are all within the purview of the board. Through bylaw, you have the ability to set timeframes on anything or on any of our bylaws or expiry dates or that sort of thing. The time-sensitive issue here is actually because we have to get this information to the provincial government by no later than the end of October. This would leave the board by August to make a decision about what's before them, to recommend any changes, which would have to land in September, preferably for adoption in October. So that's really the only time frame consideration that the board has sort of in front of them. I would also like to add that while you can put an expiry date in a bylaw, that is not a trigger for a review of taxation. A review of taxation, as the chair has pointed out, would be done through a committee that actually governs the service. That's a governance decision. This is a decision as to whether or not to get rid of this tax at that point. It is not as it sits in the bylaw, as opposed to a decision to change it, increase it, reduce it, how it funded, that sort of thing. So that's something the board in their deliberations should take into consideration.
And the question around second to third, is there? Go ahead.
Through the chair, second reading would allow the most flexibility and provide feedback to Tom, particularly the participants saying what you would like to see in the bylaw, and then we can bring back a draft in August.
Okay, so 1 second on that one. So second reading would be best. I'll come back to you for that. What I do, Graham, go ahead.
Thank you. So this might just be a little bit off topic, but there was a complaint made by Area E residents in writing regarding this service, and I was just wondering if that had ever been addressed by staff.
Yeah, through the chair and Area H residents as well. Yeah, we've responded to.
It was responded to. Okay, thank you very much. Supplemental. I've had a question come in from some residents in the area that are asking the process on this, and that it's being brought forward by staff and not being brought forward by a director. And I just didn't know how to answer that. So if you can help me with that.
So through the chair, I think through Tom's research, he found that contrary to what was believed prior in terms of the mandatory time frame, it was found that actually regional districts don't need to have that time frame. So this is strictly bringing the information to the board to say you have options here when it comes to that 10-year time frame, and Tom can add to that as well.
Tom, go ahead.
Respectfully to the chair, we knew it was expiring. Initially, we looked at it like, oh, we just got to do a renewal on this. And then once I dug into it with the Local Government Act and talked to the local government inspector, they said, you don't actually need this. This is a requirement of municipalities, not of regional districts. The Local Government Act does not apply those pieces of the community charter that apply outside of the creation of the parcel tax rule. Fundamentally, what it comes down to is we're not a taxation authority as a regional district. Municipalities are. The province collects the taxes, and so those requirements of the parcel tax bylaw are.
So very much a procedural aspect, not necessarily, yeah, directors saying we don't want this service anymore, which would be a different conversation. My question, were you good with yours?
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, so my question, and Tom, I'm sorry if you mentioned this, where I'm also watching emails for other issues. What I'd like to know is this pause for me. I do know when the year I was elected was the year this went on the ballot. So I was quite removed from it. I really didn't take an advocacy role. It's the residents' call. I'm not promoting it. But I do recall there being conversations around the 10-year timeline was also to be able to check back in. So I think there was a bit of a miss on our end to flag that at an appropriate time that we wouldn't be up against this deadline. So essentially, if we don't move forward, this service doesn't tax in 2025. So I have 2 questions for you. Number one, we know a referendum would be $12,000 to $15,000 with all the areas involved at this point, so that doesn't seem very reasonable, possibly more. But the ability to engage the public on that check back in, which I believe was a part of the initial communications around it. What kind of timeline would that require? And my second question is, if we miss the deadline to be able to tax in 2025, that does not prevent us from doing that work in 2025 and then reinstigating it in 2026, or does it?
Respectfully through the chair, to allow the expiry without any amendment would halt taxation on the service. The service would continue to exist, but it would not be funded in any way.
Yes.
So those projects that were, being funded by this would cease. At that point, at the direction of the board, you could commit to a public engagement process. I concur that a referendum would not be called for. It would be extremely expensive. I don't think it would allow you to accomplish anything that you couldn't already accomplish. It wouldn't grant you any additional abilities.
Okay. So my question on the timeline was that if we miss the deadline, we're not able to tax in 2025, is there a different process to then tax in 2026 should we then decide to continue with the service? I understand we couldn't in 2025, but does that shut the service down? My understanding is it just be dormant.
Respectfully to the chair, I agree. The service would be dormant the service would be unfunded.
Yes.
Is the way to look at it. And then it would require some subsequent amendment, whether the removal of the time frame piece or an additional time frame or something like that, in order to then say, we are now taxing this much for this time period. Again, or, respectfully through the chair, the establishment of some form of governance.
Yeah, through the chair, this would be no different than a service that was reaching its maximum, and if the board chose not to increase the limit on the bylaw, you're capped at that for that current year, but if you decided over the course of the year to then raise the limit on the bylaw through whatever process was available, then the next year you could tax more.
Okay.
So it really is just the ability to tax, but it has no bearing on the existence of the service.
So I've got you, Jacqueline, for the second time. That answers that question. Newell, for the first time. Thank you. An engagement timeline. If we did, I do feel like, given that when the service was introduced, there was an indication we would revisit how the residents felt about it. So I feel like that's appropriate to do. What is an appropriate timeline to be able to do that?
Respectfully through the chair, this is really Dan Elliott's bailiwick. He's communications and he's very good at these sorts of processes. But given my experience as chief elections officer, running assent votes, AAPs, and those processes, I would say 3 months to get there. So there's not.
Through the chair, I think I heard Dan shrug or shudder from here. I would say closer to 6 to 8 to get a good bearing, especially with the number of areas that are in there now. I think that it's also because of the fact that you've got area F in it for the first year, area H, I think coming into its second year, there's an inconsistency in terms of what people might see with respect to the service. You've got 3 areas that have had it for 10 years. They're going to have much stronger opinions, maybe perhaps one way or the other, than someone who has been taxed for it once and hasn't even seen a project implemented, because just the way things work. So I think that there's definitely difficulty there. I think that to the chair's question, I think what you should be considering as participants is this a 10-year extension and you're going to look at it at year 8? Or are you doing a 5-year extension and perhaps looking at it year 3 or even shorter, right? Is it something where you say, geez, we should have looked at this 2 years ago, so now let's make a shorter time frame so that we can start that review process now as opposed to adding another decade to it?
So I do see Dan turned on this video. Can I go to him? Dan, go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. Through the chair, I would agree with CAO Horn in the sense of the timing. 6 to 8 months would be much more realistic in terms of what we're trying to accomplish.
Okay, Tom, anything, did you want to say more to that?
Yeah, respectfully to the chair,
Cunningham.
the board should, as the board may recall, Kootenai Conservation Fund has already done considerable polling in a lot of these areas, and quite recent, I might add, to gauge support for these services. Not in all of these areas, but I know in H, G, K, and a number of them, which was the initiative to bring these services into the fold. When you're evaluating potential for success or support of the service, it may serve the board to review that information prior to an engagement process. There's no need to sort of reinvent that wheel, I suspect.
Okay, so we do have a speakers list. I also have Sangeeta. I've got you on the list. My thoughts are that we would do second reading, but we would also direct that the members get together and discuss this as a committee, which is not formed yet, and we can talk deeper there. So on my list, just checking, I've got Newell, Cunningham, Jackman for the second time, Papa for the second time, and Sangeeta, you wanted to respond now, so go ahead, and then we'll go to Newell.
Just to mention that I went through the minutes from the last two meetings with the participants on the service, and it was raised by KCP that the 10-year clause was coming up for renewal. So it just hasn't been actioned. And I think at the time, the decision wasn't firm as to what to do with that. And that's why Tom brought this forward now. Thanks.
Okay. Well, we're a little late to the game on the timeline and deadline, but here we are. So Newell, go ahead.
All right. First, I'd like to clarify that there is an exit procedure from services for an area. Is that true?
Through the chair, some bylaws we have specifically speak to that. And then there's some bylaws where they don't, so it really defaults to options under the Local Government Act, which is usually how the service was established or how that member joined the service.
Right. So my point raising that is that there is a tremendous urgency in regard to things that want to get out. I do think in the two connected, my next point, that the fund does poll. Their polling was exactly right in area H. To percentage-wise, right to their vote, was right on, which then allowed area F to assume that their polling was so accurate that it was accurate in area F as well, which was very much in favor of the service and the property and taxing of that for that service. So I'm actually caught a bit by surprise that there's any resistance to going forward with this. I read this and I had a rubber stamp it, but of course we haven't started paying yet. So I'm just kind of curious about the conversation that's going on. I would recommend that we do over the next over next year, some kind of feedback to people, let them know what's been happened over the last 10 years. And see what kind of feedback we get. But so far, the projects have been overwhelmingly approved, and Area H and Area F joined because it was so successful. So anyway, that's my comments.
Cunningham.
Thank you, Chair. It occurs, though, this is going to be a confusing process with everybody having different 10-year renewal dates. Might there be a possibility to say, can we harmonize them and have a 10-year renewal every year, a year that ended in zero or some such thing? In other words, because the people that were over the date, or we're getting closer, will be over by the time this is done, this will give us a perfectly good reason, the idea that we're going to harmonize the renewal dates, to look at the thing and do it as a single project. Because I thought of looking at how many participants are there? Rather than doing that, it would be way easier.
Folks, we have to take a quick recess, so just pause for a minute. Thanks. Sorry, I have to deal
Recording
with that.
stopped. Recording in progress.
Okay, folks, we're back in session. Sorry, just want to let Kendall know, no, we do not have, this is not a delegation time, so we will not take engagement from outside entities at this time. Sangeeta can speak on your behalf if needed. Stuart, to answer Cunningham's question, go ahead.
So through the chair, and Tom can correct me if I'm wrong, but the different participants don't have different timelines. Everybody joined that one establishment bylaw through an amendment. So Area F and Area H, even though they just joined in recent years, they're still on that 10-year timeline and would not be able to tax in 2025. So to your point about harmonizing the deadlines or the timelines, this would, they already are, and this would continue to do so.
Thank you, I needed that information.
And I think that the important note on this is there's two different things occurring. One is staff recognize that regional districts do not have the same rules as municipalities. So we don't need a deadline on this. We can still choose to have a deadline on this. We chose to have a deadline on this, whether staff was aware when they initiated this bylaw or not. So there's kind of two questions in front of the participants, which is, do we continue having a deadline? And does that deadline cease at this time? And so next on the list was Jackman, then Popoff. And I really want to recommend that we gather as a participants group to deep dive into what we want to do. Jackman, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So whether we knew or not, we had to have a 10-year limit. Part of it was driven by East Kootenay because they had a 10-year limit on theirs. We just kind of copied what East Kootenay did. But we did promise to the public, even though it wasn't us, it was our delegated spokespersons, that they would get to review and see what was what after 10 years. I really, truly don't want us to miss that. Now, if we do second reading saying we could wipe the deadline out, maybe they get people's attention. If we give Dan some time and Tom some time to think about messaging, that would be good. Maybe we'll come back in August with something saying we're going to extend by 2 years. Something that doesn't shock the constituency saying, oh, you lied to us, but gives us lots of time. That the ongoing multi-year program funding projects aren't going to say, oh my goodness, what am I going to do in 2025, 2026? So I don't want to eliminate it because I think it's a really bad thing. That's, I'm sure, why a percentage of people voted, yeah, we're good because we'll get to see this again. Maybe 2 years, doesn't have to be done today. Second reading today, get this cleaned up by August, give us a couple of years.
Thank you. So I do have Papa for the second time, Graham for the second time. Can we recommend that we do the second reading and further that we gather as the participants and we include KCP in that conversation who is wanting to speak, but I'm not allowing them at this time because they're an external entity. And they can bring forward any data we currently have and then look at where we go from here. So Pop-Off and then Graham, and then we should move along.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. That is exactly what my initial intent was, rather than having debate here, is to recommend that we move the second reading and bring it back for the August meeting. That will give directors enough time to canvass their residents and get their feedback. And if we move it back to the August meeting, then we can make the decision whether we want to defer it further or eliminate it further. But that 30-day pause will give us an opportunity to talk to our constituents or get feedback from our constituents.
I'll just say that bringing this back in August does not give us enough time to plan a meeting between participants, have KCP present and staff available. We don't have 30 days between now and the August board meeting, and we also have staff going on vacation. So I would suggest September.
If I can respond to that,
yes.
I did talk to Tom Jul, and his recommendation is to bring it back for the August meeting to meet the deadline of October.
We can't do that. I'm sorry. There's no way all the participants are available between now and then. So I'm...
Okay, September.
Tom, go ahead.
Respectfully to the chair, it's, we need to get this to the provincial government by October. If staff can get a bylaw in front of the board no later than the October board meeting with the board's preferences in it, then at that point it could be successful. The only reason I really strongly recommended September was to give the board more space in the event that something should come back and there should be further debate on the matter. But I guess in order to tax successfully the service in 2025, we will need a decision from the board by October.
By October. We need the space for the participants to get together with KCP and our staff, and doing that before August is just not possible. So just being realistic, but move your motion.
Yeah, I'd like to move, well, Director Green has an opportunity to say something before I move. When my motion would be first and second reading and bring it back to the September meeting.
And further, I'm going to add an amendment to it, and you can speak to it because it's only second reading. And further, that that staff organize a meeting with participants and the KCP before it comes back to us so we can make recommendations on what we want to do as a group that's not at this table.
Sounds good.
Okay?
I would second that if that's all appropriate as
Yes.
the motion.
And sorry, Christine, did you get all that? Awesome. Okay, Graham.
I'm good now.
Okay. Thank you, Sangeeta. I see your note. We're doing what we can. I don't want to rush this simply because we missed catching this on time. We have to do this correct. So, further discussion on the motion. All those in favor? Oh, sorry, Stuart. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you.